Hello and welcome to the GAA Museum Virtual Book Club. Each month, the museum team will choose a well-known GAA book to read and review before hosting an online interview with the author. In May, we reviewed Relentless by Mary White. Please enjoy this recording of the Q&A session. If you're not a member of the book club already, it's free to join at crokepark.ie/book club. So Mary, firstly, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
No bother, thanks a million. It's lovely to be asked.
It's the first book about a team, I suppose, we have on our book club, which is strange, I suppose, with the nature of sport. But actually, there's not as many books about teams. They tend to be maybe a story of a journey of one person, or an autobiography or a biography. So it was refreshing, but it's really a collection of personal stories, I guess.
Yeah, and I think when I was approached to write the book by a lovely chap, Patrick O'Donoghue, he was working for Mercer Press at the time. He said that he wanted the book actually to be about Eamon Ryan, and I said, "Do you know what, this book? It's about Eamon and the girls."
Yeah.
You know, and I have read an awful lot of sports books, and they can be hit and miss sometimes. And I really just wanted it to be about the people and the story, their individual stories behind them, you know, off the pitch as well as on the pitch.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think sometimes a lot of, I think GAA biographies can be very much, we won this match and we won that match, whereas this is very much about the people. And that was at the essence of who Eamon Ryan was, and the ethos that he worked with as well.
Yeah, it's funny that it's like maybe coming from a feminist point of view, that a book about the Cork ladies would that it would be about the man. So it's great that it turned out the way it did, because obviously he was a huge, you know, he's there throughout the whole book as this guiding force. But the stories are gas, and it's written in with a really light touch. I think it's lovely. You know, it's very funny in places, some very funny stories, and quite emotional as well. And you know, things that happen in dressing rooms that, you know, you'd never hear about, and you know how seriously they took, and the amount of travel. I was fascinated as well. But I suppose before we come to all the content, how did you yourself come to write it, or to be asked to write it?
Good question. So I would have worked with the Evening Echo as a news sub-editor, but I had actually been playing with Cork underage and into college. And at the time, God, I don't want to be giving away my age now, but well, I probably will anyway. But I suppose it would have been, we'll say, the late 90s, early 90s, you know, and a lot of the girls at the time, the coverage wasn't there. And to be fair, you know, there was nothing really to cover as such. And I remember the girls kind of giving out that, you know, we're not getting the coverage we deserve. And I was kind of thinking in the back of my own head, well, we kind of have to win something to kind of get the coverage. But at the time, the structures that were in place, the players, we weren't very happy with how the setup was. I suppose a lot of people like Juliet Murphy, Nolly Cleary, Valerie Mulcahy, Elaine Hart, they had all kind of started playing international sports, basketball and soccer.
Yeah.
So they had got a feel for kind of an elite level of coaching, shall we say. So they really wanted to bring that into the Cork setup. Yeah. So we had done a players survey, and Juliet Murphy had been playing with Dunamore at the time, and the editor of the Evening Echo had approached her to ask how many Dunamore players are playing in the Cork ladies football team, and at the time it was one. And they were the All-Ireland Senior Club champions. Right. There was only one player. So anyway, between the jigs and the reels, I had written a letter to the editor, Liam McHale, a Mayo man. He was a sports editor at the time of the Evening Echo, and Juliet Murphy had put him in touch with me to say, well, look, if you want to kind of understand what's gone on behind the scenes, maybe ask Mary White, because she's done a players survey and all of that. So anyway, I got off the phone from him. I kind of did my explanation, and I was kind of being my diplomatic kind of self. And I got off the phone. I was like, oh my gosh, I was only 21 at the time. And I was like, I better put in writing what I said to this man, because, you know, I just didn't know what way it would go.
Yeah.
And I dropped it into the Irish Examiner in Academy Street, just that letter, just recapping everything that I said to him. And my phone rang half an hour later, and he offered me to write a column on ladies football.
Oh.
So that's how I actually got into it. And then I ended up working there for 9-10 years as a news sub-editor and then freelancing in my own time. This is the long-winded
No, it's very
version,
interesting.
Julianne, yeah. So loved working there. So as part of that, then I was freelancing in my own time, but so many people believed or thought that it was my full-time job, and it actually wasn't. I was on the news desk. So I was covering Cork Ladies football for years. Gosh, it was about 17, 18 years in total. And the eve of Christmas Eve, that chap I mentioned earlier on, Patrick O'Donoghue, Eamon Ryan had actually taught him in primary school, and he was now a book publisher. So he rang me up and he said, I want to talk to you about doing a book on Eamon Ryan. So I met him on Christmas Eve 2014 in Costa Coffee in Blackpool. And he said, I want you to write a book on Eamon Ryan. And I was like, first of all, it was like, oh my God.
How do you go about writing a book?
Yeah.
It's a massive jump, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought about it and I went back to him. Well, really what happened, my mother over Christmas said, if anybody else writes this book,
you're going to be raging.
Yeah, you know, so, or she was going to be raging, but, you know, but I knew deep down myself that I suppose I covered them for so long. I had initially been a player on the fringes, and then, you know, I had been PRO of the county board at one stage, so there was that aspect, and then there was as a journalist. So I kind of knew I was the best.
Yeah, you were well placed. Yeah.
Now, whether I do it, you know, I didn't have a clue of how well I would do it or how to even go about it.
Yeah.
But that's literally how I got into writing, and then how the book came about.
Wow, that's very interesting. So what did you do then? You had to do this book, like how?
Yeah, so Patrick, lovely chap, but he was like, we need the first draft by was it May or June? And I was like, what, this year?
And it's a lot of years to cover as well. It's not like a 1 year story. It was, you know, a very long story.
Very long, yeah. So I had 6 months to write the book. Had never written one before in my life, so didn't know, you know, how to go about it. But what I did, I started in January or February, and I met so many different characters and players and personalities. There was about 48 interviews, I think, that I did.
Wow.
And then at Easter, I thought I would do a Bridget Jones on it, and I'd book a holiday home somewhere, which I did. I went to Blessington for a week, and I thought, this is great. Now I'll be able to, you know, get my thoughts together, you know. So that was Easter. I still had nothing written. And I remember I had all these, you know, transcriptions of people's memories and thoughts. And then we were just talking about, you know, people remember things differently. So you're trying to get the fairest, you know, view of what actually happened. I remember sitting there going, oh my God, what am I going to do? So eventually this is how mundane or manual the task was, or how, I suppose, I don't know, innocent or naive I was in starting the process. But I got an A4 pad, and the first page I wrote 2001, following page 2002, and so on and so forth. And I went through every single interview, and every story that someone told me, I wrote down to the corresponding year.
Yeah.
And that's literally how it started. So then I suppose I was weaving the stories of what happened, you know, in each year. So the book is kind of chronological, but I was very lucky that I had kept all the newspaper clippings. So I was able to refer to matches literally in the shelf behind me. I was, you know, pulling things down. So that's literally how I went about it.
Wow, it was. And how long did it take then once you got into it to do it?
Well, I suppose I had to have the first draft to Patrick probably, I think it was the end of May, start of June. But in the middle of it all, at the end of the Friday in Blessington, I remember sitting in the hotel and we were looking out over the Blessington Lake. And of course, at that stage, I didn't have anything written. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to leave my job. I'm going to have to do it time. So I did. I made the decision there and then. I can even picture it, you know, where I was and the seat I was sitting in. And I said, you know, Monday I'm going to hand in my notice. I had a mortgage, you know, like an awful lot of people, you know, I had to pay my mortgage and that, but I really wanted to do the players justice. So I handed in my notice on the Monday. I left within 4 weeks. loved the people that I worked with and everything else, but I suppose the change, it was a good, not a good excuse, but you know, it was the right thing to do in hindsight, you know. So I got it done. Eventually I got it done, and Patrick was he was brilliant to work with. You know, if there's anyone out there who's thinking of writing a sports book, you know, he's the man. He's brilliant.
Oh, I think you did a great job. It's a really easy, like, read, you know, because sometimes when you're like, oh my God, like I have to read about 10 years of football matches, it's like, and I like reading about football matches, but now I thought it was lovely, and the personal stories were fabulous. And the relationship, and because you're local and I suppose know some of the players and the management, did you find it hard to maybe address some of the topics, particularly at the start, you know, when there was the unrest or things like the Corona headband and, you know, those kind of incidents? Did you find it hard to do that because you knew the people involved?
Yeah, it was hard, but I think I was at the stage in my career where, you know, I'd covered them for so long prior to that. You know, I had played with an awful lot of them. I'd grown up with an awful lot of them. They knew that I was genuine, you know, and they knew I was doing it for the right reasons. So I suppose by the time it came to writing the book, they knew my approach, and equally they knew that they could trust me. So that's why an awful lot of, I suppose, the stories were able to come out. Now I'm sure there's plenty of stories that didn't tell me, you know.
Yeah, it does come across. They were very honest, you know, and emotional about things. So it probably wouldn't have happened that way maybe with another author.
Yeah, and I think I was blessed because, you know, I'd been playing at the very start, Eamon Ryan's, you know, at the trial matches.
Right.
And it's years later, actually, when I was interviewing Eamon for the book, you know, he had every single training session detailed. Wow. Like, and he went back to the first trial match, and he was like, "Oh, there's yourself and Valerie Mulcahy in midfield." And I was like, well, she went one way, winning 11, 12 All-Irelands, 11 All-Irelands, and I went the other way. So yeah, so they knew what I was like, and you know, and it was lovely that they were able to open up to me. But yeah.
And for them, it's good too, because I know someone, is it Malky Clerkin on the back, says like it would have been disastrous if this story wasn't chronicled. Like, you know, for them as well, because it was such a journey and such an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and like even for Malachy to hear that, you know, I remember I had approached him before the book came out. I remember meeting him in Dublin, and he was very giving of his time. You know, we sat down, and I had sent him a draft actually beforehand, and he was kind of saying, well, include this. And, you know, Malachy is just the best at what he does, you know, so it was fantastic to get that. But I think the pinnacle for them was when they won the RT Sports Award. Like,
yeah. And you start kind of there in the book as well, yeah.
Yeah, you know, like I think, was it their 10th or their 11th All-Ireland at that point, but I think it was just the realisation from their point of view that the public had actually accepted their achievements.
Yeah, and even for women's sport in general, for them to win, like beyond ladies Gaelic football, yeah, it was an amazing achievement.
Huge, yeah. And the fact that they beat Brian O'Driscoll and Paul O'Connell and the like Six Nations men's rugby team by, I think it was 11%.
Amazing,
you
yeah.
know, that did it too, yeah.
That was funny, and I like the story with Rory McIlroy behind them, and those little stories made it great. I wrote down some of them, like there's very funny things, you know, some of the trips are funny. The skiing story is very funny in Dubai, and what else? The rollerblade is brilliant. I think that was my favorite part of the whole book. And she is a great character. Like there's great characters, and like Breach comes across. She's very funny in it, you know. And for such an amazing athlete, it's good to have that comic relief as well. And then Juliet, I think, you know, her character is just, and Mary O'Connor, the two of them are so interesting. You could write books on all three of those players.
Oh,
like
totally, yeah. But yeah, Juliet, like I would have played basketball, gosh, under 15 with Juliet, like, so I would have known her very, very young, and we went to college together. I think Eamon was blessed to have a leader like her.
Yeah, and you say they've similar personalities as well.
Yeah, and just the modesty that both of them have, and just the calmness. And the, you know, Juliet is a perfectionist, you know, and I think Eamon was as well, but not domineering perfectionists, if that makes sense. Just, I suppose, had high standards for themselves, you know. And I think he was really blessed to have had Juliet there setting the precedent in the first 3 years as captain. That was massive, I think, for going forward. And not even going forward, but I think the blueprint for Cork Ladies football for years to come, even now, even still.
Yeah, she was a big presence. I remember, this is a personal story, but when I started after college, my first job was with Bill O'Hurley. He had a PR agency and I worked there, and one of their clients was ladies football, and it was the time when, you know, it was starting to get a bit of traction and it was the fastest growing team sport in the country, all of that. And she came to do was when they had to start doing the press a lot, and I remember being really impressed and in awe. And she didn't say much. She's very quiet and understated.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say she chooses her words wisely, but whatever comes out of her mouth, you take on board. It's, you know, like, it's really poignant and it's simple. And I think that was kind of Eamon's kind of ethos, was the whole simplicity of everything. But even Juliet, I remember when Cork got to the first league final, and she was going to that actual press conference, she had no Cork t-shirt or top.
You mentioned that in the book. And that whole, like, there's a lot of stuff that comes through. There's another day they're playing Laois and they have no water in the dressing rooms, and I think it's an All-Ireland semi-final or something. Like, it's astonishing when you, and particularly when you contrast it to how hard they're working and the miles they're traveling, and particularly in Cork, because it's such a big county. You know, I'm from Offaly, we would get across the county quicker, but, you know, from coming from Beara or something to where they were training, it was incredible. But good that it's chronicled as well, you know, and that situation is there, that did happen, and that's how they were treated.
Yeah, and I think it's a reminder really of how far we've come. You know, in sports. I'm sure there's definitely you know, progress still needs to be made and all of that, but I think it really tied into the resilience of the team, because nothing fazed Eamon. So even if there was no water, you know, he never made a big deal out of it, and it wasn't the simple things. You know, as in, like, you know, they didn't want all the big massive gear, they didn't want the hotel dinners, you know, there was Frankie's soup, you know, and you know,
that was a lovely story.
And even the first day when they got gear, when they got to the final, like, even, you know, the smell of plastic from the O'Neill's plastic bag when they got, you know, that was massive to them, you know. So, but I think all of that, you know, all the difficulties that they kind of went through really made them resilient.
Yeah. I'm going to go through a few of the questions here because there's a few comments. So the first one says, hi Mary, I thought the book gave a fabulous insight into behind the scenes of an amazing Cork dressing room. Yeah, it really did. And I suppose you were probably the person to tell that story, because they told you what happened behind closed doors, I guess. Oh, sorry. And here's another one. Hi, Mary. Where did the idea for all the quotes at the beginning of each chapter come from? And were these some or all of Eamon Ryan's quotes?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would have Googled a lot of them. So the quotes at the start of each chapter weren't necessarily Eamon's, but there's definitely quotes in there from Eamon, you know, that he would have leveraged. Yeah,
they're a nice touch. And actually, one of the questions that came in earlier is on that too. Let me get it now. Here. I'm wondering how she went about choosing the quotes that begin each chapter, particularly the inclusion of Conor McGregor, as his numerous convictions made at various times and allegations against him are hard to make him a good role model. Would you include his quote if you wrote the book again? Bit of a left curveball one there.
Yeah, I stand corrected on this, but when the book was published again in 2019, I'm not sure. I might have changed it. If not, I definitely thought about it.
Interesting that that's where your mind went as well. Yeah. The quote is still, I guess, good, you know, but I loved the quotes as well at the start, and I think it kind of gave each chapter its own personality. I thought it was really good. Let's have another one here. Hi Mary, did the Cork players think there was a bit of a conspiracy against them leading up to the start of the 2014 final versus Dublin, or was it just a coincidence with the barrier incidents? Yeah, that was good, and the lack of time for the warm-up drills. The ploughed field was a good story as well.
Yeah. Sure, there always has to be a conspiracy theory thrown in there. I'm sure a few people probably thought that, but I'd say not, you know. I think at the time Eamon's quite annoyed about it, but look, again, it was just the resilient side of them, and it did throw them probably initially. I think it was more the warm up, you know.
Yeah, they were late for the warm, or
they were late for that, yeah. But look, they were just experts at what they did, and they just, you know, kicked into gear, and well, in the second half.
It's amazing when he said, right, we're just going to go into this field. They just followed him everywhere, didn't they? Anything he said, he says, I think at one stage that if I had said run down there to the shop as part of your training and buy an ice cream cone, they would have just done it without thinking they'd do anything for him.
Yeah, and like, you know, I only played under Eamon very briefly, very briefly, but just getting to know him, and it actually wasn't until probably about the 4th or 5th All-Ireland final at the press conference was probably the first time I actually sat down and spoke to him properly, you know, not, you know, on a professional level. And I remember the press conference was in Bishopstown GAA Club. I remember we were sitting down towards the back and we were just chatting about actually sports books. And he was telling me about, oh gosh, he was actually asking me, he he said, do you know Ryan Giggs' father ended up, he actually played rugby down the Mardyke in UCC? And I was like, really? Go away. And he was telling me the story how Ryan Giggs' parents had split up and Ryan Giggs had taken the mother's name, but that, you know, a lot of people didn't know that he played down the Mardyke, his father. And then he was telling me about, I forget the second, Alan, I forget he's a Scottish soccer player. He's a pundit, but he's saying, and I'm reading his book.
Isn't Alan Hansen?
Alan Hansen, yes, that's it, yeah. And he's saying, I just finished his book now, and you know, he represented Scotland in 3 different sports. And I was like, gosh, I didn't know, like, but he was just a fountain of information.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until that point where, you know, that I kind of got to know him, like, he kind of let me in a bit. And obviously doing the book, you know, he totally had let me in at that stage, you know, and we used to meet in Wednesday night. The girls used to train in the farm in Bishopstown every Wednesday night, and I'd go out an hour and a half before training, and we'd literally sit in the dressing room, those green sheds, and the caretaker would make 2 cups of tea, and we're sitting on the benches and we're talking about, you know, the year, and he has every week he'd bring his notebook, and but no matter when you were talking to him, you always felt like you were the only person that mattered, you know. And I think that goes back to how the girls would do anything for him. And I'm sure, you know, I can only give my perspective. I'm sure they will probably say something similar if that's deeper. But how he did that was just, I don't know. I haven't met anybody else who was able to do that, just that ability to make you feel like the only person that mattered in that moment of time. It's just unbelievably powerful.
Yeah, wow. Because my colleague Ailish does we've been doing online Legends tours. So last year, I think Rena did one, and Ailish was just saying it to me today. That was one of the main things that came out of the interview, was like just the respect and how highly she spoke of him. So so there's a question then: could Cork have been so successful under anyone other than Eamon Ryan?
I could be biased here, but just a tad, but no way, you know. Like probably the closest person probably to him, and again, I've never played under Brian Cody, obviously, but a lot of people would say they're quite similar.
Right.
No, I don't think so. Just the way he was able to bring people together, and his high, you know, no rules, high expectations. I think he was so unique in his personality alone, you know, his demeanor, you know. I never saw him get him animated on the side of a pitch, rarely. I don't know.
That's a bit different from Brian Cody now.
yeah. I'm sure he had his moments, but I, you know, raising an arm or whatever, like, very different to Brian. But just the modesty, like in every aspect of his life, you know. And again, I didn't know him, you know, overly well. Like it was, and even just in the last 2-3 years, you know, I probably got to know him even more, and our relationship kind of got a bit closer. But no, he was the master, as they called him. You know, they called him the master from school, being the headmaster. He was like, you know, and he didn't think it for 1 minute, or he didn't, you know, he never had an ego. And then that obviously all transpired down into the players, like, you know. So to answer the question, absolutely 1,000,000% no.
And did he say anything to you after the book was published, or did you ever hear his thoughts on it?
It's funny, yeah, because I got an actual lovely text message during the week from a brilliant photographer, Tom. He does initiphotography.com, and he's been covering the girls for so many years. And he actually saw that I was doing this, and he sent me a lovely message, and he said, you know, that he called down to Eamon's house just a few years ago in Ballingeary, and he brought out the book, and he said, you know, have you read it? And Tom said, I have. And Eamon had apparently said, you know, oh, I'm delighted with how it's turned out, you know, and for the girls, you know.
Yeah.
And even just to get that text message, I was like, you know, gosh, because Eamon would never, you know, kind of blow anyone's ego up, but
yeah,
he rang me, I'd say he rang me maybe November, December, you know, when he was ill there late last year. And he brought up about the book and how he was just delighted that it was documented for the girls, but everything was for the girls, you know. And I think, you know, for his family now, I'm delighted that it's there for them, you know, not just the girls, but them, for his family, because they gave up so much of their, you know, husband, father, grandfather, you know, uncle, brother.
Yeah.
You know, so just, you know, very happy for his family that it's there for them.
It's a brilliant story. And actually the families in general, that's kind of a theme that goes through the book as well, you know, how the parents and the partners followed the team. And I suppose it's different from, you know, if you get called up to play, you know, inter-county for Kilkenny or Tip or whatever. In the men's code, it's obviously a huge deal, and there's big stadiums, whereas it felt like a really, particularly at the start, like a really tight-knit community that went and supported them, and then it grew and grew. And there was talking of some of the parents became really good friends, and the club started to become friendly as well. I thought that was a really nice part of the book, and I hadn't really thought about it. And particularly some of the girls were so young. Obviously, they did need their parents to drive them everywhere and to really help out.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I think for a lot of the older, we say the older girls, we say Nullig and Valerie and Elaine Hart and Juliet, like, who had been hammered for years, you know, their parents had been going to those matches for years as well, you know. So it was lovely. And then there was lovely relationships between, you know, the Stacks and the Walshes because of Breed and Angela's relationship.
Yeah.
A lot of people probably would forget, you know, Eamon Ryan's brother Jim. Well, so many people would know Jim Ryan. He's a legend in sport, you know, cross soccer, and his son Don, and people like Tommy Seward, you know, they were there as well, you know, kind of on the fringes with the team. They were kind of, you know, Don obviously got involved later on, but they were at every single match, and there was just a lovely kind of, I suppose people were, you know, they were there through the bad days and they were there through the good days, and I don't think they forgot the bad days, and that kind of
unites them. Yeah, like the girls themselves. It was great because you don't think of, you know, I suppose the families that much, and it's a huge commitment here, and particularly for the dual players. That was yeah, like they're incredible. That's do you think, is it dying out now, even the dual, I suppose the capacity to do it?
Yeah, I think so. I think in 2004, 2005, there was 7 dual players on the Cork team. I'm not sure how many there are now, but there's definitely not that many. I know Hannah Looney and Libby Coppinger. Yeah, I think it's dying out. And some people have made the argument, you know, over the years that, you know, if you choose to play 2 sports, you know, you have to take the, you know, whatever goes with that, you know. And I know Juliet had been playing, you know, international and Super League basketball at the time. Valerie had gone playing with Cork City FC.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that it's a GA family, you know, but I mean, that aside, like, I mean, some of the situations the girls are put in was perilous is a very strong word there, right? But
police escort was crazy.
Getting a police escort to match, you know, and speeding down motorways, you know, legally with a police escort, whatever it might be. I mean, those situations should not exist. Now, I mind the player welfare element of that goes with it, but yeah, I'd say it's fairly rare now that you'd have dual players. Yeah, going forward, I'd say.
Particularly both, like, because the camogie players were doing well as well, so you had two very, like, suppose professional teams that they were committing to. Like, it's probably should be spoken about a lot more. And Cork have always been good for dual players in the men's game as well. I suppose it's a county where there has been dual players. It would be a shame to see it dying out.
Yeah, well, look, we'll take the two best with Rena and Breach, you know, 18 All-Irelands each, you know.
Yeah. I have another question here. Was it a major cause of frustration for the Cork squad to be messed about so much by the county board regarding the lack of gear, equipment and dual fixture congestion, especially in the early stages? They didn't say much about it, really, did they? And you don't talk about it too much in the book, of their feelings anyway.
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose initially, you know, with the player survey that was done, there was not little requests. There was a proposal put to the county board at the time, probably just before Eamon came in, when Mary Collins was there as the junior manager. And of course, you cannot not underestimate the value that Mary Collins brought to the whole thing, like, either. But like in that player survey, there was, you know, a proposal put to the county board, and I know it for a fact because I helped put it together, you know, just, you know, having a training weekend away, having, you know, training gear, having a bag, and just for that cohesivity element of it. It wasn't a greediness. It was, we want to look the same, feel the part, you know, that kind of a aspect to it. You know, that there'd be a female liaison officer, that the team would be picked, you know, the players would be told 2 or 3 nights before the match, you know, as opposed to arriving at so there was a frustration there. But when Eamon came in, those things kind of, you know, I mean, the setup was much better. It was set up, and I think that the county board probably did get their act together a little bit as well. But to answer the question, yeah, there was probably a bit of frustration there. All right, for a while.
And I suppose when Eamon came in, the way he went about things, I suppose quietly, that probably was a better way of getting things done than coming in roaring and shouting and demanding. It probably was more effective.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And you know, you'd have read in the book that, you know, he didn't address the rivalries or anything.
Yeah.
You know, and like when you think of it, like that's probably, you know, managers or, you know, leaders, their automatic or instinct is to go in and fix. And it's an Irish thing as well, I think, you know, you want to go fix and solve people's problems. But the genius of him was I'm not going to address it. Now, I'd love to know, I should have asked him at some point, you know, did you know what you were doing? Like, of course you did. You know, he always kind of said, I didn't address it, you know, kind of, but he was around the block, like, you know, he knew that, you know, there's no point in addressing it, you know.
No, they're going to have to confront it at some point themselves, Yeah,
but I suppose it was the what's the word I'm looking for, like the genius, I suppose, of not having to react in the way that people would probably normally do so.
Take sides.
Jumping in and
Yeah. And then you mentioned Mary Collins there. How key was her role?
Oh, massive, huge. And like, she didn't want the role initially because and I had played under Mary, and like Mary was like very strict, you know. She played with Cork herself, you know. She was one of the first players to ever wear a Cork jersey, so she knew how far it had come even to that point. And like her commitment alone, like, you know, she had young kids at home and she was like traveling, you know, 2 or 3 hours just to and from training and from North Cork, and she never missed a training session in the 3 years that she was there. But she just brought I think a professionalism in terms of managing, you know, the setup. Eamon obviously was coach at that time, the first 3 years, but and just the way she dealt with the players, you know, if Mary told you something, you took it on board. And there was obviously, you know, she would have brought Breed training every day, Breed Stacker every night, and you know, she'd a one-to-one with Breed saying, you know, pull up your socks kind of a thing, and you listened. But just the way she carried herself and her dedication is massive as well. And I don't think people can underestimate her input in the first 3 years, again, just to create that foundation and that framework for what Cork ladies football is about and what people expect nowadays.
Yeah, I think you describe her really well. Like we feel like we know her, and there's probably people in a lot of clubs that are like her. You know, people locally would have somebody like her, a real driving force. And so I enjoyed the part about her, and I thought it was very sad, nearly the way, you know, she was so disappointed when she had to step away. Obviously, that was very like kind of a poignant moment in the book.
Yeah, and even just her when I think she went training with her local men's team. And Geraldine and Breed. Yeah. You know,
yeah, that was there's great little anecdotes, and it was probably again because it was yourself, and they made the book come alive. You know, it wasn't just they trained, they won. It was the little personal stories and the travels and all of that. I loved the trips away as well. I thought they were great. I have another question here from earlier. An absorbing book. I finished it in 2 sittings, really enjoyed it. I found the club rivalry interesting. I wonder, is that why all these weekend get-togethers, holidays, etc. came about in men's games originally, to break these rivalries? The dislike of some county managers for club games also now makes sense. Is this a very difficult thing to address?
Oh, that's a big question. Gosh, I forgot half of the question there.
Yeah, well, I suppose. Yeah, was it a hard thing? I suppose you've talked about how Eamon dealt with it already, and you said it probably would have been a hard thing if he had come out straight and said it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I stand corrected on this. This is probably a question for probably Mary Collins or one of the girls. Like, I would say Eamon's goal was not to kind of get them to bond on a team holiday. It was to get them to, you know, train and train hard, and by that they kind of bonded together, you know. And again, he probably knew that, like, it wasn't a case of we'll go out in the, you know, go out in the sun and go on the piss or whatever it might be, you know. But you know, like him walking the beach, you know, to find the training spot and like just
it was interesting, and the sing song seemed to play a big part. And have we ever been present for any of them?
No, I haven't. And again, that was the kind of hard part for me, I suppose, you know, because I'd have loved to go on sessions with them, but you know, I suppose I kind of professionally couldn't. Now, obviously once or twice I would have, but it would have been very, very rare, you know. But I remember, I think it was after the 2014 All-Ireland final, or it might have been Eamon's last final, and they were staying out in the Clayton somewhere in Dublin. It wasn't their usual. They normally would have stayed in the Red Cow, I think. And I remember I had filed all my copy and all of that, but I had gone for some reason. I think it was because I was writing the book, actually, just to get a feel for what the hotel was like. And they all started filing past me. It was about 12 o'clock that night. And I was like, God, and they were all walking past me going down the stairs. And I was like, what's going on here? But Eamon had asked for them to have a sing-song in a room on their own, you know.
Wow.
I think he loved that.
He must have,
Just listening to the players, I think that's when I think it was talking to Valerie Mulcahy, you know, after Eamon passed, you know, I think the few seconds after the All-Ireland final and then those sing-songs, I think that's,
he loved,
you know, when he really loved it.
You talk about he loved music and driving in the car. That's how got him through the trips.
The pleasure box.
Yeah, there's actually a message from the Ryan family here. It says, thanks Mary for giving us this treasure from the Ryan family. So that's lovely to have. And there's another question. There's loads of questions tonight. Would you agree the Cork men's squads could have learned from the ladies in regards to putting the heads down and getting on with the job rather than strikes and expecting things to be laid on for them? I don't know if you want to get that political, but that's the question.
I can't speak for the men's setup because
That's
I wasn't in it, where I was in the ladies football, so I knew that. But what I would say was, um, when the tide was turning for the Cork ladies footballers, and I mentioned earlier about, you know, the older players who had, you know, wanted a change in the coaching setup. At the same time, in and around the same time, Roy Keane walked out of Saipan because of standards.
yeah,
And the Cork men's footballers in Donalogue did the same thing, you know, and maybe it's just a Cork thing.
Clark's.
But you know, I think the Cork ladies probably got a bit of a, I wouldn't say a boost, but you know, sometimes you have to stand up for what the right thing is. And you know, there were so many people, and you know, I suppose I can't stress this enough, there were so many people before Eamon Ryan, you know, the likes of Charlie McLaughlin, Father Kelleher, God, so many who created an unbelievable underage structure, and they were doing their absolute best, you know, and sometimes our best mightn't be good enough, you know, and I think sometimes you need to call that out, and but for the right reasons and in the right manner.
Yeah.
And I think that's what accountability is. And I think the Cork ladies saw that in what they saw with the men and what they saw in Roy. And look, we all know that Roy is God in Cork, so what Roy says it goes, we're all going to follow, really.
And you mentioned, I suppose, in the book as well, a lot about ritual and, you know, how everyone's presented with their jersey and, you know, tradition, and mostly going to the same hotel, always doing the kickabout the day before. How important is that, or was that, to the girls and to Eamon?
Well, if you talk about ritual, the biggest ritual of all was Frankie Honan's soup and scones on a Sunday morning. You know, like, again, you can't underestimate what Frankie was the longest serving out of everyone.
Wow.
You know, he was there the longest, more than Eamon, more than Mary Collins, and again, just went about his business. But that ritual alone, you know, I think that's probably, again, I'm not a player, so I can't speak, you know, for them, but just listening to them, those moments on a Sunday morning were the biggest. And I think I'd have personally, when it came to rituals, I'd have loved to have been in the dressing room when Eamon was presenting the jersey, and for the last person to be the captain, you know. And if you were that captain, gosh, I'd say what a feeling that would have been, you know, to be the last person, and for Eamon. But like, he knew what that would have meant, that to that leader at that time, you know. He'd so many leaders as well, but like, I know, having played, you know, and I've captained one or two teams in my time, but oh my God, I'd say that feeling would have been massive if you were the captain getting that jersey from Eamon.
And I suppose the captains that that you talk about, what was their impact individually on the squads? Like, did they change under each captaincy, or did the feel of the dressing room change, do you think?
I suppose each one of them, God, I stand corrected now on this, but there was probably 7 or 8 captains maybe under Eamon. You know, there's Juliet, Anne-Marie, Angela, Rena, Breach, Amy, Mary. Could be forgetting a few more there, and apologies, Kira. They probably all bought their own little bit, but I think the 3 years that Juliet was there, for the first 3 years, just set probably a precedent of the expectation, and the expectation of lack of ego.
Yeah.
You know, as a leader, and the ability to bring other people with you on the journey, you know. So I'd say an awful lot of them brought something different, but the framework for how to be a good leader and a good captain was definitely set by Juliet.
Yeah, and the piece where she's kind of agonizing over her retirement, that's a really good insight. And you meet with her to interview her, and
yeah, and she was telling me that at the time, and I remember meeting Juliet on Patrick Street. Actually, I'd say the book was only out a few months, and she said, she's like, I'm so sorry. She said, you know, I haven't read it, and she's like, I just can't bring myself to read it. Now, she might have read it since.
I was wondering, had she read it? Because she for a quiet, I suppose, person, as you said, doesn't say much. She does tell you a lot. Like, you get a good insight into her in the book.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember when I met her, when she decided to retire, and we met for lunch in the bodega on Carmarket Street in the city. And it was a big deal, you know, for Juliet to kind of walk away.
Yeah.
And I remember just sitting there, and obviously we would have known each other since we were younger, you know, and played together and stuff, but I could see the agony in her face even then, you know. She had come to her decision, but like it just meant so much to her personally. And even I'd say on a personal level, her relationship with Eamon, you know, she went back teaching. She would go down, he offered to give her grinds, you know,
Irish, yeah.
go down to her home, and Pat, and obviously they'd all welcome her in that. But yeah, she agonized over it. But you know, again, Eamon's genius, like the story about him, you know, Nolik saying, "Come on, come back," and then she just arriving out to the farm, and Eamon not even saying anything. Like, oh my gosh, like even thinking of that, like, but it's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And with the book we did last month was Last Man Standing by Christy O'Connor, and he talks about some of the, you know, the goalies after, you know, high profile careers walking away, and just how hard that is to give it all up. And obviously you're tired and your body's aching, and you know, you have other commitments and you're missing out on family events, but it must be so hard as someone at that level to leave it all behind. And you know, when you could possibly go back, you know, it must be very hard to say goodbye.
Yeah, and I suppose she had played, you know, international basketball and Super League basketball, and her body was probably tired as well, you know. Yeah. So yeah.
So another question in here. Hi Mary, which was your favourite sport out of the three in which you excelled, and what were the main differences between the three? That must be somebody who knows you.
No, I know, yeah. Put your name in the chat there. God, good question. So yeah, I would have played basketball, ladies football, and soccer for Cork. Would have played basketball first actually with Cork, then ladies football, and then soccer when Cork City were desperate for players. They came knocking on my door. But you know what? Loved basketball actually. Just the pace of it. Loved playing football with my club, Rock Bond. Just, you know, we were lucky to win 2 All-Irelands. Again, just fantastic people like Marion Mulcahy involved, you know, just so many brilliant people involved and passionate people. If I say which was my favourite to play, God, I'll have to rank them now just for a bit of controversy. But I would say if there were soccer teams when I was younger for girls, I'd have loved to have excelled at soccer. Some level, then basketball, and then ladies football.
That's okay.
Yeah, don't shoot me now, but yeah, just I suppose, and that probably boils down to my ability too, as well, you know, as everything else. Like, so yeah.
But a lot of the girls played other sports in the book as well. Someone was an athlete, did cross country, and there was
the Walshes, Orla Farmer is another excellent athlete. You know, I think there's something in the water in East Cork. But like even other sports aside, there's so many of them so successful off the field, and because of in their professional lives, because of how they grew as a team, and how they learned to work with one another, and how they learned to, you know, diverse personalities, and how to deal with different situations and different people's perspectives. And you know, there's nowhere to hide on a pitch. You know, you have to put in the work. So I think they can see through an awful lot of, I wouldn't say, you know, what's the word I'm looking for, the polite word, but you know, they could see through an awful lot of stuff in their professional lives. And again, the dedication, like, you know, you mentioned the traveling, like Mairead Kelly from Dublin, you know, Ciara Walsh flying from Manchester every weekend at her own expense, you know, Geraldine O'Flynn, there's so many of them. Just the dedication that they put in for so many years, you know, is now reflected in their personal lives, you know, and in what they do as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it I suppose it radiated out to all parts of their lives. I thought the wedding was a nice part of the book. Just felt like, you know, a special time when they were, was it Nolig's wedding, and they were Yeah, I thought that was nice. So that was a lovely little insight, and random that President Michael Higgins is that the way.
Yeah, I think he's related to Nulloch in some shape or form.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they've been invited to the Rs and everything, like, and I think
yeah,
he would speak very highly of them as well. And I'd say Eamon was I'd say Eamon would have very good time for someone like Michael D. I stand corrected again. I'm sure his family would say, might say otherwise, but just two very intelligent men,
yeah,
with an interest in everything and anything, and a curiosity to continually learn, no matter what age you were, or what ability or what level you were at. Just that continuous curiosity and openness to learn. And I think that's why Eamon was so good, because he never, thought he was probably the best. He always knew he could be better. And then obviously, again, by osmosis with the players, like, they
yeah.
continually, try to make themselves better as well.
And what's his legacy, do you think, now in ladies football in Cork?
His legacy. Oh, writing the book, I would have said the simplicity of his, I wouldn't say style, but it's put the ball off the bar. Nowadays it's all trackers and heart rate monitors and everything else. Like, just get the basics right.
Yeah,
For years,
blocking. Yeah,
yeah, like for years, like, people were like, what's a secret, like tactically or whatever. And I think the girls would say, like, half the time there's no tactics. It was just work hard, get behind the ball, defend, put the ball over the bar. It was simple as that. But
yeah,
now I think, on reflection, I think it's his legacy will be his modesty. And when I say that, I think the modesty that in which he carried himself, both personally and professionally, and as a coach, I think that just led to so much brilliance, if that
yeah,
makes sense. I think that was the bedrock of the core of him, because he put people at the center of everything he did. He put the players at everything he did, and everything was done for the benefit of the players, and then as a team as a whole. So I think the modesty with which, and I'm sure he had absolutely difficult conversations with Mary Collins and Frankie as well, and but he did it for the good of the team. But
yeah,
it was never about him, and
yeah.
that to me is his legacy. And I think that's a really coach, or any good leader for any matter, is the modesty with which you go about achieving what it is you want to achieve. Because if you're not modest, you're not going to bring people on the journey with you. They're not going to want to be involved, and you're not going to empower them either. So I think, yeah, to answer your question,
Yeah, that's
modesty, yeah.
a good answer. Hi, Mary. Your honesty in answering that question really comes through in the book also. A very honest and thorough insight into the Cork ladies' psyche. So you're getting loads of fan mail tonight. I have a couple more questions. I know it's coming up to the hour. Was the book always going to be called Relentless?
Good question. So I can't claim to have come up with that name, and actually loads of people have asked me over the years, like, why did you call it Relentless? Initially it was Small Heads and Small Arses.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would have gone down too well. Like,
mightn't have aged well, I guess.
Yeah. But it was my partner actually came up with the name, and we were drinking, oh gosh, I forget the name of the pub, on Bridge Street in Cork City, and we were upstairs. Again, I can remember where I was sitting, because
you've a good memory for cafes and pubs and hotels.
Yeah. But I remember thinking, okay, because we said we'd go for a drink, because this was it now. You've said you're going to do it, like, you can't back out of it. So, your mind kind of starts going, and you're like, oh my God, what do we call it? And I remember saying, if you had to pick one word to describe them, like, what would it be? And it was, they're relentless.
Yeah.
So that was the name that we stuck with, and I think it sums them up.
And how does that work in the process of, like, did you say to the publisher, this is what it's going to be, and they liked it, or that was just it? Yeah,
I think that was it. Yeah, and I think Patrick kind of knew as well. He's so much time frame, and again, he taught him, and probably made Patrick, in part, the man he is today, because that was the impact that Eamon had on so many different people. So it was lovely to work with Patrick as well, because he got it. You know, he knew Eamon, he understood his brilliance, and so yeah, he appreciated the title. Yeah.
And then just a couple more questions. I suppose yourself, you've the other book about Cora. Have you any plans for any more?
No, not at the minute. You know, we'll see. I think for me, you know, I was best placed to do the Cork book, and then the night of the book launch, it was a running joke, you know, oh, you do Cora's next, you know, given who Cora was, and then of course that came about. And I suppose, you know, the whole point of me doing the books as well was to give the Cork girls justice, you know, for what they'd achieved, and the same for Cora, you know. So I think whatever book, if there is another book in me, it would be very much about, you know, doing someone justice, someone, you know, someone's story justice, you know. So I think that would probably be rare to find.
Yeah, well, you certainly did them justice. I really enjoyed the book, and I thought, you know, as I said, I wasn't sure what to expect when I came to it, because I didn't know the ins and outs. I just knew the top, you know, the top line stuff. So it was really enjoyable, and hopefully we can do the Cora book again. I'd love to do that. I've one last question here, which might be a nice one to finish on, coming in from Anonymous. What lesson can the successful Cork ladies team give to the men's hurling and football teams?
Oh, that's a tough question. Yeah, these ones are hard because, you know, I'm not in either camp.
Yeah.
And, you know, I suppose having played sport myself, every team you play with is different. The people are different. The setup and background and structures around you are different. So I think it's very hard to comment, to be fair, you know, to both camps and that.
Be relentless, maybe.
Be relentless. Do you know what? Have a bit of fun. You know, I think sometimes, and Breach Corkery, I mean, her Laker Gale was amazing, the best one I've seen. And I think just her attitude alone, like, you know, 110% on the pitch, but you know, I don't know, just kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, and she went away, she took time out, she went travel, she was in New Zealand, I think, and yeah, but her, you know, and then when she came back, it gave them all a lift, and yeah, that really came through. I thought she was great, and you captured her brilliantly in the book.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure that knowing Breach, there's a few bits that we probably
and you never found out you never found out who the two players were who went out on the night. It was in Dubai. No, where were they? On one of their training camps.
Do you know what, Julianne? This will tell you now. Out of the 48 interviews, no one has ever told me who the players were. Like, that's how, you know, committed together they were, like, you know.
Yeah. And I liked that the rule was just, you know, there was no rule. They kind of knew themselves they shouldn't have done that. It was probably more effective than having an embargo or something.
Oh, definitely. Like, again, it's accountability by your peers. You know, you don't want to let them down, and vice versa, you know, so kind of carried on.
There's a couple of comments. Thank you for a wonderful talk. And then Mick Buckley says, fantastic interview. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. It's a great story. I'm really delighted it's part of the book club, and I'm so happy that you took the time out this evening on such a lovely evening to come and talk to us. And then there's one last comment here, and as I'm from Offaly, I appreciate it. Breach Corkery and Johnny Pilkington would be a great match. So I think on that note we will end that. So thank you, everybody. We are going to send you details of the next book tomorrow. It has another Cork focus. Just obviously there's some good writers in Cork. It's Boy Wonder by Dave Hannigan, which is, I suppose, a different type of book again for us. It's a memoir of going to matches and being on the sidelines of games growing up. So it'll be something a little bit different. We haven't done a memoir yet. So I hope you all enjoy it. And here's one final comment. Really wonderful conversation. Such interesting insight from Mary, and excellent to see the spotlight being shone on ladies sport. Thank you very much, Mary and Julianne. You're very welcome. So good night, everybody, and tune in a month for the chat with Dave, and I'll send out the dates tomorrow.